Hello and welcome to the Space News Commercial Space Transformers series, where we aim to give you behind-the-scenes look at the people and companies driving the space industry's commercial transformation. I'm Jason Rainbow, senior staff writer at Space News, and today I'll be talking to James Parker, co-founder and president of private credit firm Leonid Capital Partners. James began his career as a NASA flight controller, but now specializes in providing financing solutions to companies with government contracts. Companies like ABL Space Systems, a six-year-old launch startup which recently announced plans to exit the commercial space industry and focus on missile defense programs, highlighting what has always been a very challenging part of the industry. Okay, so James, you began your career as a NASA flight controller and transitioned to finance. What inspired this shift, and how does your astrophysics background
Uh,
inform your work in private credit today?
um, I came out of Rice in Houston with an astrophysics degree. My first job out of college was at Johnson Space Center on the robotics desk of the particularly the robotic arm for the space station. And if you asked me then if I was ever going to look for another job again, I would have told you no. Like outside of being an astronaut, it was kind of the goal, right? I grew up a
Yeah.
space geek. My mom's moon landing newspapers on the wall. I have had it up there forever. So that was it. But I don't think there's a 21-year-old on the planet Earth that's quite ready for government bureaucracy to hit them directly in the face, like right out of the gate. So um, in and of itself, what wanting to get a little more, I would just call it velocity. I moved over into the unmanned satellite side of the world, did some work there for a couple other NASA programs, then picked up a security clearance and ended up in the intelligence community doing a lot of real-time warfighter and operator support from space-based assets, particularly during the second invasion of Iraq.
Mm.
At some point in the aerospace world, you got to decide if you're going to go hardcore engineering or if you're going to go program management. I went program management, and from there, sort of the tradition. Got ended up in business school, caught the finance bug. Quite frankly, I'd never taken a business class, a finance class in my life. I walked out of Econ 101 on my first day, my senior year, because I was like, I don't know, I don't even understand what I'm doing here. But again, when you're all of a sudden when you're 30 years old, you're a different person than when you were 21. So I found myself much more gravitating towards finance and business concepts. Caught the finance bug, ended up with a turnaround or restructuring career at Alvarez and Marsal, but always had a soft spot in my heart for this side of the world. I like the technology, I like the mission, I like the people in it. It's fun to come back, kind of piece my whole background together and come back into it this way.
Mm.
As far as like how my background informs it, like familiarity with how these things work, and don't get me wrong, I'm not jumping in the lab anytime soon. But at least having an appreciation for how it works it goes a long way. Being able to connect with the people, the entrepreneurs in the space, I find critically important. But really, I go back to when we're especially when you're flying the fast moving satellites, we used to call it 90 minutes of boredom followed by 5 minutes of terror. Just because if you didn't hit your downlink window, like you were screwed, quite frankly.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
um, what we did is you spent 90 minutes sitting there trying to figure out game planning scenarios, trying to figure out what the process are, like what's going on, how are you going to react in certain scenarios, and then really tuning yourself up to the point where when you're in that 5 minutes, you can make definitive decisions in the time that you have to. Fortunately, what I like about that as an analogy to business and particularly private credit is you can game plan these things all day long, but when it comes down to it, you're going to be put in a spot where you've got to make a choice and you can analyze yourself out of any deal. If you
Mm.
spend enough time looking at anything, you will never do any business. So the trick is being able to make a definitive decision when you've got enough information to do so without analysis paralysis or however way you want to put it. Um, the nice thing about finance is you get to change your mind though. If you're wrong, you can just change your mind and go back. So my business partner Chris, he has this thing. It's strong convictions loosely held,
Mm.
which is like believe in what you're doing, but definitely be willing to change your mind when presented with information or data that suggests you've done something wrong.
Right. And hopefully in most cases you get a little bit more than 5 minutes to analyze
Hey,
what's going on.
I thankfully, yes, the timelines are a bit more extended, and there's a little less existential crisis going on
Right.
when things are choppy.
But it's a fascinating journey because of course there is also this broader shift or a blurring of lines between government and commercial. So what do you see as the key drivers behind this transition to a more commercialized space industry?
My my perspective on it is like it's inevitable. We kind of have to do it, quite frankly, as a species, if we want to actually take advantage of like if we want to actually take advantage of our situation here in this world, like we have to push further out into space. We can't rely solely on the government. We have to develop a commercialized approach towards it. But everyone really has to understand that if you're in the space business, you're in the government business. There is no way to be purely a commercial space company. Just down to licenses, approvals, launch facilities, like you're in the government business no matter what. So understanding that you've got to thread both of those needles in order to get this right, I think is just truly critical. I think it can be what um, can muck things up, especially on the investing side of things. Is that you have to take some government risk, and that's sometimes a non-starter for people.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to touch on that a bit later. Just the kind of the government support and how critical that is in in getting financing. But could you walk us through just how private lending fits into that broader financial ecosystem
Mm.
that's supporting the space industry and its transformation?
It's an interesting problem, right? Because the equity markets are easy to understand when it comes to investing in these companies. Lending normally falls into a very traditional bucket, right? It's you have kind of two things that lenders would hang their hat on. One is assets, right? And the other is cash flows. Starting in the end, cash flows aren't particularly prevalent, certainly in early stage space companies. It's just not. It's not any fault of the people in the business. It's just the nature of the industry and how long these things take.
Mm.
So if you take out the cash flow lending side of things, you really just have your traditional box would be assets. The issue with assets in the space business is you had twofold. One side, the assets have a tendency to explode, sometimes on purpose. And on the other side, if you are successful, if you do have an asset, say on orbit, it's kind of hard to repossess a satellite. It's not impossible. People have done it before. But when you get down to like your traditional lenders and your traditional credit box, the idea of like, what am I supposed to do if my asset is, flying by at 17,000 miles an hour and like I barely understand how it works, let alone how I would actually go take control of it. And even if I did, I'm not sure what I would do with it.
Mm.
So you're lacking sort of that traditional tangible collateral base that would drive most lending, or you're lacking the cash flow that would fill in that gap. So it's kind of a sticky wicket. It's why I think you don't see a tremendous amount of credit players in this space. And it's one of the reasons why our unique approach towards and our unique perspective on government cash flows in particular allows us to be such a meaningful player in the market despite being relatively early into it.
Yeah, well, so how do government contracts influence financing strategies for space companies then? What trends are you seeing in this area? Just how important are government contracts in the commercial business?
Well, again, I go back to if you're in the government business, whether you like it or not. Okay, if you view yourself as a commercial player or not, I think a lot of times people view the government the you find people refer to their government contracts as non-dilutive financing, which I find really a funny statement because it's really just a paying customer. It's kind of the best kind of. So there's a little bit of I think people just are. It kind of shows you where the perspective is sometimes when it comes to the market appreciating government cash flows. We like it because we have a particular view on the credit quality of those contracts. We don't think they have a high likelihood of getting canceled. I think they are focused more on creating capability development versus delivering specific payloads to orbit, which obviously can have serious failure rates and can have impact. So we like our high tech research development of capability side of the world, because we find it produces a more reliable cash flow with a very reliable payer in a pretty unique market that can have challenges in that sense.
Yeah, well, speaking to the challenges too, and some of the unique issues facing the space industry. One of the space companies your company supported was or is ABL Space Systems, to provide a
Yep.
$20 million term loan. ABL recently announced it is exiting the commercial launch market to focus instead on missile defense programs for the Pentagon. So kind of going the opposite way from commercial space to
Yeah.
government. But what do you make of that investment? How has it changed, or has it changed how you see the launch sector, or the wider space industry?
So this one's interesting because our actual thesis on getting into that business is actually their government contract, and in particular the missile defense work, their
All right.
responsive launch capability that they were developing, versus their commercial launch roadmap, like their commercial launch roadmap. We were we were very bullish on the idea of tactical responsive launch development, and in particular missile defense. So when we heard the shift, all it really did was reconfirm our thesis. Like,
Mhm.
I think launch is kind of challenged, like commercial launch, certainly in the medium and heavy side of the world, is kind of challenged at the moment. You've got somewhere over 150 potential operators, in the average market assessment is that maybe we need 13, 15 in total. So you're already heading into a kind of a saturated market, a tremendous amount of consolidation coming in. And quite frankly, every time SpaceX manages to re-land a rocket and reuse it, they're just drilling down their unit costs and making it harder for anybody else to compete. So I kind of quite frankly, we were very bullish on the pivot. We're super supportive of the company. We love what they're doing. Missile defense is going to be an enormous market that people haven't really addressed in a cost efficient way or with unique technologies yet. And every day coming out as we amp up tensions with China, as we see what's happening with Russia, missile defense takes a lot of different, there's a lot of different flavors to it. I mean, Russia just launched an ICBM into Ukraine, for God's sakes.
Mhm.
So, long story short, very bullish on that. Love the team, love the technology, and quite frankly, as part of their shift, none of their government contracts saw an impact, which
Right.
is again kind of our thesis at the end of the day.
Okay. So what areas in the space industry would you say are just most critical for investment over the next 5 years? Where are the opportunities? It sounds like launch might not be the hot spot for you.
Not for us. Certainly, I'm not trying to bag on it for anybody else, but the way we look at it is software and services, space domain awareness, material science, component, like propulsion component manufacturing. So we've got a number of different investments. Sidaro systems, this digital twin architecture. So this goes back to, if you got an asset on orbit and you want to try to run an analysis of changing code or an update to the system, you can't do it with your on orbit asset, or you risk nuking the satellite for no good reason.
Mhm.
So they create digital twin architectures that give you a sandbox in order to make those changes and differences, and so you can see how they play out. We have a couple different material science plays: Canopy Aerospace and Infinite Composites, both critical. I'd say there's a critical need for new and better material science within the space. Phase 4 does unique ion propulsion engine work. Love that one. Love those guys there. Obviously, ABL, responsive launch and missile defense, is something that we're very high on. Scout Space does space domain awareness software work. I mean, Kessler syndrome kind of is one of those weird things that keeps me up at night. So I always like it when I see somebody that's working on domain awareness and collision avoidance. And then we did a decent sized deal with Xenopower, which is doing space and lunar nuclear power generation. Like I just think it's like picks and shovels at the end of the day. I think that's really, I think a lot of times people got fixated on launch because it's very sexy. Everyone loves a good rocket, right? But I think the real money is going to be made in kind of all the pieces that build up into what is, is specifically, it's interesting. Somebody referred to it in the past. Space is not an industry, it's a domain. Like
Hmm.
everything you care about is actually going to happen in space. So everything is going to need all those constituent components when it comes to like potential investment theses. I think it's just going to be awesome.
Right, right, and it's pretty clear to see the government demand across all those segments you highlighted there. All right, we're running out of time, sadly, so I'll let's leave with this one. For startups watching this, looking to secure funding, particularly in the space industry, what advice would you give them to prepare for discussions with private lenders like yourself?
Private lenders in particular, you'd have to come in and have a good understanding of um, what I would call it your near-term business plan like is, especially as it relates to your cash flows and burn rates and survivability, right? Like, unlike equity checks, which come in and are taking, they're buying a piece of your economics in perpetuity. A lender is coming in and taking a discrete risk on a particular discrete period of time. So this is why you'll take, if you look at kind of a traditional lender, they're going to go in and say, show me 3 years of profitability, show me your cash flow, show me your asset stacks. We've already discussed that's not quite the profile of the companies in this space. So
Hmm.
for us in particular, this is, if we've got these stacks of contracts, they last about 3 years each. This is our plan to get through the next 3 years, which is why you taking a risk on us to help make these growth investments in our business are going to create a much more sustainable and stronger business. Just really
Right.
understanding the ins and outs of the cash flow of your business versus necessarily focusing on the tech. Like at the end of the day, I think lenders also are lucky in the sense that we can take sector wide bets. I can loan money to all the propulsion engine companies. I'm not making one. I'm not worried about my one becoming the market leader. I want to make
Mhm.
sure everybody has an equal chance of having a great chance of success. So we are extremely supportive across the board and are willing to spread our bets even within very unique niches.
It's good to hear. James, thank you so much. That's fascinating. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk through all that.
I really appreciate it, Jason. Thank you for the opportunity.